League of Legends is a huge esports game in terms of raw numbers of people watching, the number of countries they're watching. It obviously has a massive penetration worldwide overall. With that said, the actual numbers in terms of the esports side and the number of people watching competitive matches compared to the total player base of active players monthly is actually deceptively small. It's quite a poor conversion rate compared to other games. I mean, Riot themselves have said they have 100 million active monthly users, and yet for the Season 5 World Championship, when they must have had a few less overall actives, not that long ago though, a year ago, they got a maximum of 14 million viewers for the final. They said that was the highest concurrent peak, and that percentage rate is something like half of CSGO and like a quarter of what Dota 2 has, in comparison to what their monthly active amounts are of players. So the actual conversion rate is quite poor. And one of the reasons why I think that is actually the spectator experience. Now, admittedly, sure, when you talk about the spectator experience and you compare to those two games, it's true, Dota 2 has a spectator experience which also isn't particularly good in some of the same ways as League of Legends, but admittedly, it is a much better client and a much better engine, so it's newer, the graphics are more crisp, etc. And a lot more of their player base who plays the game is actively involved in the competitive side, not just playing casually. But with that said, when you consider they have this many viewers, I think that this is actually one of the problems that this has as a game, is that it's a very difficult game to watch as League of Legends. Like when I came into League of Legends, and I was a veteran of esports who'd been around the esports scene something like 13 or 14 years already at this point in time, I'd watch every esports game imaginable at that point in time. All the Quake games, Unreal Tournament, Counter-Strike, even different versions of Counter-Strike like Source was a game I didn't particularly play, but I could watch it. StarCraft 2, Brood War, Warcraft 3, I'd even watched some Dota. And yet when I came to watch League of Legends, this was the most difficult game to watch, as in watching a pro-level game without having played the game, of any I've ever tried. Even worse than Dota. And Dota was still pretty bad in itself. It had a lot of the similar problems, but this was worse. And part of the issue to me is it wasn't intuitive in any way. And so I've been thinking about some of the ways that they could change things within the spectator experience. So it wouldn't be in the actual game itself, just in the client or whatever they use to show the game for the spectator, or they could add some of it in post if they want. Whatever the situation is, these are things where I think it would make the experience more intuitive, and therefore the number of people who watch the game would be more. So it wouldn't, first of all, there's going to be casuals who watch the game who they only play a little bit, and if it's not champions they play, they won't know what's happening. So not everyone owns all the champions, not everyone's played every champion, not everyone knows all the interactions. First of all, there's also a lot going on the screen, even if you know what's happening, to catch every single little detail. Even professional casters, as they're doing it, can't catch every little detail, and sometimes miss a little key aspect, and then people afterwards, like Reddit analysts, are like, oh, idiot, you didn't know what we're talking about. But actually the guy was just watching the game in live time. He didn't have time to go back and check what happened or reverse engineer something later in the game. So here's a few of the things I think need to be done. First of all, I think a very obvious thing to do would be to have some form of intuitive color coordination for different abilities in League of Legends. So an obvious example, and this is a very simple one off the top of my head here, okay? So I would have it so that whereas in the game, different abilities have their own graphics that are all separate to the champion, and depending on what you're doing in different situations, how about this? All spells that are to heal someone have a blue trail connected to them. All spells that are to do damage to someone, a skill shot, have a red trail added to them. You could have one where, for example, something that's just a point and click ability, let's say that has a black line with jagged lines on it, that means it just goes into the person. Let's say something that's a pure skill shot, if it wasn't just for attacking purposes, other types of skill shots that could have wavy lines behind it as it fires out. You could have it in a situation where something that's CC could be like a cool blue color as it goes out, the line following it. So we're not changing the overall graphics, we're adding in an intuitive component where once you understood the color coding, and once you'd watched it a bit, and once you heard what people are saying is happening, you're going to naturally understand, even for champions you don't necessarily know all the details of, and other aspects, what's going on in a fight, who's doing what the key aspects are, who exactly it was who healed, who did the damage there, all these sorts of things. I would have these things happen. Likewise, people who are being auto-attacked, I don't know how you do this exactly, but maybe they could flash, and so the more damage they're being hit for, the more they flash, or the more people are attacking them, the more they flash and then something else. Like, I'm not sure what you do in that particular scenario. See what I mean? These are all things that once you break down the problem, you can start to come up with solutions to. I would also have a scenario where, for spectators, okay, sure, maybe Riot can't upgrade the engine of League of Legends. Maybe they can't make that better. But can they make a better engine in terms of the spectator client experience? Can they improve the graphics for that? The key thing for me is one of the problems with modern games. I actually think this is why StarCraft 2 had a lot of problems in terms of viewing compared to Brood Wars. Brood Wars is a very old game, and so the isometric aspects of it and the fact that the units can't be too close together meant it was quite easy to see what's going on. In StarCraft 2, things clumped together, and the graphics were amazing. They were very good, but they weren't very clear to see. So the key thing here is I want crisper graphics. I want graphics that, yes, are very high quality, so I can pick out the detail, but I want to be able to see all the little aspects. I don't want it to be a big blur and a big mess of all different colors and things just going together, and you can't really make out what's happening. So update the client in that particular sense. Likewise, how about a more simplified, streamlined client? Find a way in the spectator client to take out different aspects of the background or different components that make certain colors hard to see against each other. Sure, it won't make the graphics look as good, but they will be crisper and it will help visibility, and therefore people will naturally understand what's going on at first glance, as opposed to having to break it down, listen to every aspect of the commentary in the same way. How about when you're attacking someone, maybe for the client only, spectators, numbers leap off them. So when you hit them for 300 damage with AD, a little red 300 damage comes off them. And then someone hits them for 100 AP and a little 100 comes off them. And so not only are you seeing the health, but you're seeing how much damage people are doing. This is all a way to mentally be able to absorb the information and to track roughly what's happening, even if it's just by feel of what you're seeing on the screen, not necessarily being able to register every little number in this particular way. Likewise, how about on the health bar, instead of just having it so it's that long health bar and then it goes down, and then the more health you get, the more tiny the little segments of the bar are, which is actually, yeah, okay, that is vaguely intuitive, but it's hard to see, put it that way, especially when there's a big team fight. How about having the same health bar, but at the edge it's got a little box and that has a percent in that goes from 100 to 0 and goes up when you're healing, etc. So you can see, right, they're hitting this massive tank, oh, he's still got like 60% left, and that's that much of the, like, I think this is another way to add to how intuitive it is as you're watching the game. When it comes to doing replays, I think a way that they could really help easily understand what's happening in the replays. Yeah, obviously the commentator is going to do his job, but this is a feature I don't see used very often, and yet I've seen it in some movies for League of Legends that made it fantastic. So when people do solo movies, one feature I love when they implement is when, as the team fight's starting, they pause for a second and then they put a box around the player you're meant to be watching. So they go, it's Faker, the team fight's about to start, box, here's Faker on LeBlanc. And then as a result, then when you watch him go into the fight, right, you know who you're watching, you know what you want. Because when the replay first comes up, you're not exactly sure. You're having to get your bearings. Where am I? What am I watching here? Which player exactly am I watching? This is a very simple way to signify to someone to do it. By the way, for people who are making movies, please keep doing that. It makes it fantastic, especially for solo queue movies where they're playing different roles or different champions all the time. It's often very hard to see who does the kill sometimes with those short clips. But I think for pro replays, it'd be really good as well. I also think another thing they should do more often that they don't always do as much, they do it a bit in LCS, is I would like it more often in those 1v1 and 2v2 fights. If they did a better job of figuring out when it's key to trigger the vision when showing us one person's part of the fight, essentially. So that as a result, we see that when he went into the brush there, I couldn't see him, and then he came out. Like, they do a decent enough job with that, but they've got to do more of that to get that down for the people who, again, most of us understand when he goes in the brush and there's no ward there, well, he can't see him there. This isn't something so simple for the other people to know. I mean, that's actually a problem, by the way, that CSGO has sometimes, where they don't always turn the smokes off, and yet you can see the people through on the spectator client. So some noob fans probably don't think to themselves, oh, you can't really necessarily see him there. Sure, they don't understand the basics, but there'll be times when they can't tell if you could see him, whatever, so slightly. In League of Legends, I think this sometimes is an issue. So this is just it might sound like a small issue, but I think this would be a big deal that would actually help the game a lot more. First of all, I mean, people who don't play League of Legends could in theory watch more of the game and understand more aspects intuitively, as well as then combining this with what the casters are telling us in an analysis post game would gain more insight and more quickly get into the game without playing it themselves. I also think it would even help the most lower level casual people get a sense of what's going on, because some of them probably don't know what's going on in a team fight. Like, which person am I supposed to be watching here? Supposed to be tanking here? Who's supposed to be doing damage? You can't just take for granted that people know this stuff. So I think part of the bad conversion rate and part of the fact that as an esports game, despite having 100 million active accounts, it doesn't have like 10 million every week for LCS. It doesn't have 50 million for the World's Finals, which would be the kind of conversion rate it should have compared to some of these other esports games. I think this is a reason why, and this is something that Riot could fix and improve.